So, yeah, I'm generally terrible with introductions. So I usually leave it up to our guests to share a little bit about themselves, and maybe just personalize it a bit. Share maybe one interesting, unique thing that someone might not know about you.
Okay, cool. So, good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for coming along, as Mark said. And so, I'll introduce myself. I'm Eoin Cosgrave. My role, professionally, what I do is I lead the enterprise sales team for Amazon Web Services in the UK and Ireland. And I've been in AWS for 6 years. 6 years on one day. Yesterday was my birthday, my AWS birthday. So I'm pretty much smack going on 6 years in AWS. So a bit of background on me. Before that, I did a bunch of different things. Immediately before I joined AWS, I worked for a medium-sized managed services organization. Before that, I spent a number of years in Accenture as part of their consulting organization, consulting into financial services organizations. And I worked for some product companies before that. So I had a bit of a windy route to where I am today. So that's what I do at AWS. In terms of how do we define enterprise at Amazon Web Services? Well, they're basically the largest organizations operating in the UK. So think about constituents of the FTSE 100, for example. So some of our clients in the media space, organizations like the BBC and News Corp, in oil and gas and utilities, BP, Shell, SSE, in retail, Tesco, Sainsbury's, etc., etc. So the largest organizations operating in the UK. So that's how we think about enterprise in AWS. It's probably worth touching on what Amazon Web Services do. The profile of AWS is definitely significantly higher now than it was when I joined 6 years ago. But I'll explain briefly what it is we do at AWS, and it's probably worth starting with a definition of cloud computing. Cloud computing is a term that's been around for a while, for a number of years now. I think it's much misunderstood. So the definition we have at AWS is the delivery of massively scalable IT infrastructure resources as a service over the internet. And crucially, those services have to be available on demand. So that means customers pay for them when they're using them, but just as importantly, they stop paying for those services when they stop using them. So that's how we define cloud computing. At AWS, our job is to provide infrastructure services, or a scalable infrastructure platform that our customers can leverage to build and run applications on behalf of their company on top of AWS. So that's probably the simplest description of what we do at AWS.
Sure.
One unique thing about me, you can probably tell from my accent, I'm Irish, and somewhat stereotypically, I come from a big family. I'm the youngest of 8 children, and probably a career in sales was destined. Of the 8 of us, 6 of us all work in sales. I work for Amazon. One of my other brothers works in Google, and one of my other brothers works in Azure. So whatever happens with these cloud wars, the Cosgraves have it covered. but I can tell you, the only company my dad's buying shares in is Amazon. So there you go. That's who he's backing.
Yeah, and so there must be some sort of like agreement if one seems to be winning out there. Bring the other two in.
Yeah, absolutely, and we're very professional. We don't share any secrets.
Excellent.
So, yes, it's very professional. So yeah, it's good fun though. Yeah.
Excellent. I do want to talk about enterprise for a second, right? Because for some organizations, they'll define enterprise as size of companies. Sometimes they look at market space or market share, revenues, head counts. How do you truly define enterprise at AWS for you? Is it just purely just the names that you choose to be enterprise, or is it something maybe deeper?
Yeah, we have a few metrics that we look at internally, but basically what it boils down to, we're not too rigid about it, but what it boils down to is the largest organizations that operate within any one geography. So usually we'll look at whatever the local index is. So obviously in the UK, that's the FTSE. France, it's the Porto, etc. So usually that's our starting point, and then we'll broaden beyond that to organizations that are similar to that. So for example, privately owned organizations of a similar size. So in the UK, you might point to Dyson or something like that, or also internationally based organizations that have a significant presence in the UK. So that's generally how I look at that. The reason we bucket those organizations together is because of their size and the way they approach technology. As probably lots of you knows, they have they have certain requirements that don't exist in other segments. So that's kind of how we look at it.
And obviously with enterprise, having been a long-time enterprise sales rep at a place like Oracle and Siebel, you know the stories of some of the difficult deals that you've worked on. Could you maybe just share a few of those large enterprise deals? You don't necessarily have to name names if you don't want to, but maybe just talk about like maybe one of those big deals that was a real challenge and that you were able to pull through.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about AWS, it's a very different model at Amazon Web Services. So we approach sales in a very different way. So you could say that we don't close deals, right?
Interesting.
Which is probably an interesting. So let me give a little bit more background. So Amazon's it's a very unique, but it's a different type of organization. Amazon's only been around for 21 years, so it's grown into a large organization. And AWS, as part of Amazon, has been around for 10 years. We celebrated our 10th anniversary in March of this year. And there's a few things that are unique about Amazon and about AWS. So the first thing is we're very customer-obsessed organization. So we start with our customers and we work backwards. And the best example of that in AWS is how we generate our customer roadmap or our product roadmap. We have thousands of individuals who are operating all over the globe and working with our customers. And a very important part of our job is to take feedback from our customers and put that into the product teams. And roughly 90 to 95% of our roadmap from our products comes directly from the feedback that we get from our customers. So a very customer-obsessed organization.
And this, just a quick aside, is that a separate organization, like a customer success organization, a delivery organization? Who's actually taking the pulse of those organizations?
No, that's the remit of anybody within AWS who has a role that's customer facing.
Okay.
So it could be account managers, solution architects, professional services, evangelists, etc., etc. So anybody, because of the nature of AWS, anybody who's customer facing, a very important part of our role is to listen to customers and innovate on their behalf. So that's the first of three things that I think is a little bit different about AWS. Secondly, it's a company of inventors, Amazon, and AWS is a great example of that. I should probably, I'm not sure if any of you are aware how AWS began, or maybe
the brief history would be really interesting.
Maybe I'll share that story. So there's a common misconception that AWS is selling excess capacity for Amazon.com at holiday periods or after holiday periods when it's not needed. But I can tell you that that's not the case. So the origin of AWS, it really came from some struggles that Amazon.com was noticing. So in the early 2000s, despite the fact that we were adding lots of headcount, the pace of growth of the organization, so our ability from the retail side to add more catalog items, for example, wasn't increasing. And after after a lot of analysis and looking into this challenge, what we figured out is that there was a common challenge. A lot of the different teams had, the engineering teams within Amazon, and that they were spending too much time on what we call undifferentiated heavy lifting. So procurement for storage, procurement for servers, setting up complex databases, etc., etc., etc. So the way we solved that was by creating a common web services component, a platform within Amazon, and we provided basic networking, compute, storage, databases, services to the teams. And what we noticed is that had a dramatic impact on our business. The pace of growth of Amazon sped up significantly because the teams could dedicate their time to value-add product delivery on behalf of customers, and instead of worrying about what we call this undifferentiated heavy lifting. And we realized through that process that we developed a core competency in the creation of massively scalable infrastructure resources. And in 2006, a few years later, we externalized that service, thinking, well, if we're suffering from that problem, Amazon, and other organizations might be. So we externalized it and launched the first AWS service in 2006. And today, AWS has over 1 million active customers in 190 countries and is a $10 billion business. So that's $0 to $10 billion in 10 years, which makes AWS the fastest growing enterprise IT services business of all time by a distance. So that origin story applies to my second point, which is it's a very innovative organization, hires inventors, and AWS is a really prominent example of that. It was invented to solve a problem within Amazon and then grew into the external service that we have today. And the third thing is we're very long-term oriented within Amazon. So we think about long-term relationships, and we want to create relationships with our customers and our partners that outlast all of us. For very good reasons, because we're customer obsessed, and it's not about the individual; it's about the relationship between the organizations. So all those three things I think combine to mean that Amazon's a different type of organization. So you'll never hear an account manager or see an account manager on Amazon knocking on a customer's door on the last day of the quarter, asking for a deal and dropping price. Our approach to a pricing philosophy is, we have this flywheel effect, whereas the larger AWS grows, we can eke out more economies of scale, so we can reduce our operating costs, and we'll pass those savings on to our customers. And we've reduced prices over 50 times in the last 8 years, I think it is. And the important point of that is that's largely in the absence of any competitive pressure to do so. But it's part of the business model that AWS runs and designs. So we're not under any pressure, so you won't see those kind of tactics. And I personally think if what we see particularly in enterprise sales, where and probably lots of us have been in the situation where you're sitting around a table and you're discussing, for the first time, some commercials around a service.
Sure.
You know this if you worked in Oracle. And the first price that you're talking about is, it's not the price the customer's going to sign at. They know that. And by the time you get through that process, what they actually sign is probably 50 to 80% lower than that first price you discussed. But if everybody knows that, isn't that a waste of time?
It's an interesting game, right?
Yeah.
Because I think what's happened over the years is that, particularly when I was at Oracle, right? Because the expectation was you have a list price,
right? And
at some point, that list price will, particularly with the companies I was working with, which were all the largest of large enterprise strategic accounts that we had, ultimately the value of the deal, what the price was being paid, was under 50%, oftentimes, than what was initially quoted, sometimes even more, right? So, and it just seemed to be this game where we up the price, and we increase the discount, so it makes people in procurement and the CIO look like heroes. And that always struck me as the oddest thing. So it's really interesting to hear that from an Amazon point of view, you've taken a very different approach.
We've taken a very different approach, and I don't think that approach earns trust, and I don't think it will survive in this IT economy that we currently operate in. You're seeing enterprises take more advantage of open source software, and you're seeing enterprises get more used to utilization billing with software as a service and infrastructure as a service. So control and power and decision making is going back to the customer, which is a brilliant thing. If you look at any Amazon businesses, the goal of Amazon is, in any of those businesses, to provide selection, convenience, and choice to the customer. And AWS is no different between the services we provide directly, but the services we provide indirectly through partners like CloudReach, and also through Marketplace where software is delivered. So choice and power and selection is going back into the customer's hands, which is a fantastic thing. So I think we'll see there's a lot less deals, these big 10-year outsourcing deals that were, kind of part of the norm in the 80s and 90s, and you see a lot less of them today than you did a decade or two ago, and I think that would continue to happen, right? So,
I agree. It's amazing to me because I'm working with companies like Citigroup, for example, who sign really long-term deals, right? And then they would switch providers because they would look at that and they'd say, we really haven't seen the value of our relationship. And they've been very price-driven. I think it's been very disruptive in terms of talking about value. So how are you conveying the value, as opposed to really focusing on the price? Because even though you want to be able to deliver a cost-effective solution, ultimately you really want to talk about the value that you're providing from a solution provider perspective. Right? So how are those discussions evolving? And you're obviously getting input from customers. When someone's coming to you and saying, we need this, how does conversations proceed?
Yes, I think there's a number of benefits that enterprises get from leveraging AWS, and I'll go through some of them, and this is part of the early conversations with organizations. Of course, you start with the customer and work backwards, but there's a bunch of benefits that AWS can provide. So the first one, and I didn't understand this when I joined AWS, I thought it's the cost model. That's what organizations are most interested in, it's the lower cost model. But it's not actually the most important thing. The constant feedback we get from customers, the real benefit of AWS is agility. And the power of agility is to unlock innovation. And all enterprises, we're in a period at the moment where most enterprises are under significant pressure to transform because of new entrants in the marketplace, because of competitive pressure to do so. So they're concentrating on reducing technical debt, and a lot of times one of the reasons they want to do that is so they can unlock funds to power, if you like, innovation and experimentation. So that's why agility is so important to organizations. If you have a low-cost, agile platform that gives you shorter procurement cycles and allows you to leverage technology in a much different way, then that's a big benefit to organizations. So agility is a key thing to talk about when we're talking about value. The second thing is cost structure, of course. And in a consumption-based model, like AWS, it's like a utility provider. So at the end of the month, depending on the services that you've used, you get billed appropriately for those services. So if you can trade a typical CapEx way of using for OpEx, and typically that OpEx is much lower than you could provide yourself because of the economies of scale that AWS provide, and that cost structure is a significant benefit as well. The third benefit that we see organizations leveraging from AWS is elasticity. So gone are the days where if you're launching a new product or a new service in a new geography and you're not sure how successful it's going to be, you have to take a view on risk. So you'll estimate how much infrastructure do I need. You'll probably scale for peak, and then you'll cross your fingers and hope that you get an ROI over a certain period of time. But with a utilization model like AWS, you don't have to do that. Your requirements can very closely match, or your infrastructure demands can very closely match what your requirements are. And we have customers who are doing that type of stuff all the time. So Expedia, for example, is a good example. Expedia had launched a joint venture in APAC last year for a new travel portal. And it was a new geography with a new set of new customers in a geographical area where they didn't have a data center footprint. So they partnered with AWS to deliver that service. As a result, they could get to market much more quickly, and they removed a lot of the cost barriers, if you like, because they were able to experiment by removing a lot of those risks. If they were going down a traditional route, they'll probably still be negotiating data center contracts today. So that's a summary of the benefits, and that's part of the conversation when you're talking about bringing value to organizations that they can leverage from the cloud. And they're as I list them out, they're probably not difficult to understand, and they seem like simple benefits, but the simple value proposition of AWS, the basic benefits are oftentimes a significant improvement from a traditional way to procure.
Sure. Yeah, the interesting point you bring up, we touched on it before, was really the buyer's expectations.
Yeah.
So imagine you're dealing with a lot of technology leaders, CIOs,
yeah.
CTOs, about compute, about resources, agility. So what is a senior IT leader looking for when they have a conversation with a sales lead or a sales executive when much of the information these days is so readily available?
If I was to boil it down to one word, they're looking for insight. So if you think about what's happening at the moment, we're undergoing, we're in the midst of a technology transformation that's unlike anything we've seen before, and it's happening at a much faster pace than anybody predicted. I mentioned that Amazon Web Services is a $10 billion business now. It's got there in 10 years. But to draw a comparison to some other well-known technology companies that have been there for a long time, Microsoft, for example, it took Microsoft 22 years to get to a $10 billion business. And Oracle, it took Oracle 23 years to get to $10 billion. So AWS has reached that mark in a very fast time. But why is that happening? And the root is, the supply and demand, and the supply that AWS is driven by demand of what customers are looking for. And the pressure that organizations have to transform is significant, and you can look at it, it's happening in all marketplaces. So look at telco and the consolidation that's happening in telco. I think if you look at the big 6 energy providers, a number of years ago they owned 99% of the market in the UK. Today they own 85% of the market, so almost 15% of their market penetration has been eroded by new entrants to the market. If you look at look at the startup space, look at the impact that Airbnb has had on the hotel industry, right? And look at the impact that Spotify has had on the music business. These are startups that were launched on AWS a number of years ago and now sizable businesses. These are traditional industries that have been around for a long time that have been completely disrupted by new entrants into the market. So the pressure on enterprises to transform is very real and it's very significant. So it's no longer good enough for them to just potter along. They need to be agile, they need to be nimble, and they need to react to these pressures that exist in the marketplace. So they're the factors that we're seeing. The common conversations that we're having, as I mentioned earlier, is around technical debt reduction and around supporting innovation. So that's what enterprises care about. So, and how are they doing that? I think they're doing that by getting away from the single provider long-term 10-year outsourcing contracts, and they're now getting to make much more incremental decisions, buying decisions about what they do. We're seeing power devolve down to software developers and autonomy in decision making. We're seeing enterprises leverage new ways of developing the software in much more agile ways. We're seeing that decision-making power filter down through organizations. So as a result, they'll be able to make decisions that suit their business and suit the projects that they're trying to deliver. So our role as professionals, as enterprise account managers and professionals, is to be able to guide customers through that journey and provide insight. And that's a role that I think carries a lot of responsibility. And while I think there's a lot of information out there on the internet, as you see, I think this change that we're going through is happening so fast that there's still a lot of education and insight that we need to impart to our customers. And one thing that we've done at AWS is take commonalities from the journey hundreds of enterprise organizations have made already, and then learn from that, and then we educate our staff and we go out and we consult with the organization on that so they can learn from previous.
I'd like to maybe dig in a little bit about the education portion, because I think one of the biggest trends just within sales organizations is the realization that they need to better enable their teams to have these types of conversations, to talk about value, to talk about ROI, be able to dig in and have a conversation with CFO, for example.
Yes.
Which is very intimidating for a lot of sales reps, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what are you doing to enable your reps to be successful and be effective and efficient in these conversations?
Yeah, so there's two things I think about as a sales guy. One thing is hiring. You got to hire the right people. That's an easy thing to say. I started managing people about 4 or 5 years ago, and I could have told you my first day management, it's important to hire good people, but you've got to learn that by perhaps not hiring the right people a couple of times. So it's important to hire the right people. So figure out what it is that your organization is trying to do, figure out how you're going to get there, and then hire people that align to that and that have the right skills, so that they don't have to spend 3 months within your company learning something. When they arrive day one, they can add value. And I've seen that with a bunch of the folks that have come into the team, because they come from backgrounds where they've been working with large organizations who are going through transformation, and they've worked to consult with them on a services basis on how you drive that change. So hiring the right people, that's the first thing that's really important. I think the second thing is building replicability around how you're successful. So one of the things, or how customers can be successful. So one of the things that we've done, for example, is we've learned what a journey to the cloud looks like for a large enterprise. Then no two journeys look the same. Enterprises are different, but broadly, there's a number of steps that most enterprises go through. So we've mapped out that journey by listening to customers who've been on it and learning from engagements that we've been on. And then we map the different resources that we have within the organization against the different steps on that journey. So our professionals now have all the knowledge and the insight that we've learned from hundreds of engagements to other large enterprises, and we can bring that to bear for other organizations. Because today we find that, probably a number of years ago, the most common question we got asked is why cloud? And the last couple of years, the most common question we get asked now is how. And that's why I think insight is so important. And if, particularly from AWS point of view, if you're the market leader and you're a consideration for organizations who are going through this big transformation, then it's a responsibility. You need to be able to be in a position where you can provide that insight and guidance, so that the journey is as friction-free as possible.
What do you think in your hiring? If you hired the wrong profile, where were those reps going wrong? What was fundamentally not right for AWS, an organization mission?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I'd say a common thing I would say is being too short-term oriented. And I talked about how being long-term oriented is particularly important in Amazon, but I think it's particularly important in any organization where you want to sell to enterprise, or you're helping enterprise go through this transformation. It's a multi-year journey. So you've got to be long-term oriented. I've seen folks make mistakes where they focus too much on the short term. As a result, you may be taking actions that are not in the best interest of the customer. That's transparent to the customer. So I think you got to be able to focus on the long term and what that means. The other thing I think is development, so learning. So nobody's more important and influential in your career development than yourself. Nobody's going to drive your career any faster or any better than you will yourself. So think about where you want to go, think about what the areas of development are, and make sure you're learning in that direction or in those directions that you want to travel in. Because if you're not in these fast-growing organizations like AWS, the organization is very fast, and if you don't move with it, well, it's a fantastic opportunity to move with it. It's a fantastic learning opportunity, and if you don't grasp on it, it's a shame.
No, I agree. I think there's two layers of just your development. There's the development that you take on yourself because you're a professional,
right?
And you want to improve. You want to become someone who can provide value for your customers and understands the market and has the business acumen to go in and have those types of senior level conversations that actually have impact. I think the second part of it is also organizationally, how are they equipping you when you go out to have those conversations? To have successful conversations. So part of it's training, part of it's coaching, part of it is just the ability to have marketing and product teams provide you with information that would be relevant and useful at the time of engagement with the customer. So are there any sort of programs that you have in place just to provide that type of support for the sales organization?
Yeah, we do. There's a few. So bear in mind, I used to work for Accenture, which is a very large organization.
Right.
And if you were talking to your manager about career development, you could go onto an intranet page, you could click on a page, and it would show you a diagram with 150 different directions you could go in. It was all very structured and visible and that type of stuff. Amazon's a very new organization.
It's the fastest growing startup ever.
And it's growing very quickly. So in that environment, the opportunity for development is significant. I can think of 3 examples off the top of my head of people who were doing a certain role and they spotted an opportunity to do something different and they pointed at it and they said, I think we need some coverage there. They wrote a 2-pager and a few months later they designed a new role for themselves. So that's it. So I'm drawing a comparison between perhaps how it looks in an organization that's been around for decades and pretty stable versus a hyper-growth organization. So there's huge opportunities to develop, but a lot of it is learning on the job. But we have done a bunch of things to help people be successful in their first few months, such as codifying or writing down the journey that organizations take. Our folks learn that and they can bring that message to their customers and help them, avoid some pitfalls or remove friction from that. So, and I think we will develop more and more of that collateral. But I think it's a mix between, here's some best practice that you can follow versus. Work closely with the people around you, and you've got an opportunity to learn as you go.
I want to give an opportunity for anyone who has questions, please ask away. This is an opportunity for all of us to participate and learn and grow. So, anything comes to mind, please share. Meanwhile, why not?
I do have a question, yeah.
Please.
I think one of the things that caught my attention from Amazon was the enterprise events that they do. They organize, for example, summits.
Yes.
And they bring partners and they have a really nice ecosystem.
Yeah.
So how important are those events for the general sales process?
Yeah, really important. To give the short answer, so part of our sales process, if you like, or how we go to market, we see our job as one of educating customers or prospective customers on what's the path to take and what's the journey to take. So we take a slightly different view on these conferences that we launch. So we do an annual one that we call reInvent, which is in Las Vegas. So a bunch of the sales teams get to go to Vegas once a year, which is a real shame, but they're troopers, so they battle on and they go and they do it.
It's a tough life.
It's a tough life, exactly. But that conference will have almost 30,000 people there. We did the first one 5 years ago, I think it was. And this will be our 5th one this year in November, so we'll have almost 30,000 people there. And they're designed not to be sales and marketing conferences, but to be educational conferences. So the majority of the tracks that we have are either delivered or co-delivered by customers. Because there, who better to tell the story, warts and all, about what the journey looks like. They're very deep. There are a lot of technical sessions. The idea is that you can send folks along. We do an exec track which is separate, but for the main conference, it's a technical education track. The idea is if you come along and spend some time and deeply immerse yourself for a few days, then you can go back to your organisation with a bunch of learning that you can share with your organisation and help to move a little bit quicker. We do local summits as well. So we did a summit last week in the Excel in Docklands, where over the course of 2 days we had somewhere between, I haven't heard the final numbers yet, but somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 folks come and join us. And again, the overwhelming majority of the sessions that we did across those 2 days were delivered or covered by customers, so they're telling that story. So thanks for reminding me. It's a very important part of the sales process, and a very important part of how we think about educating customers.
Yeah, in the back.
You mentioned your sales guys don't close deals. Do you not pay them commission?
A good challenge.
That's a good question.
How are you compensating if there's not this concept of closing deals? And
yeah,
because it almost seems like you have a continuous relationship, and there's continuous billing because of utilization. So how are folks compensated?
Yeah, so we do compensate folks, and we do have an incentive compensation. Absolutely. The point I was trying to get across is it's a different business model. So it's utility based billing. So at the end of a month, we'll add up the cost of the services that our customer has used, and we'll send them whatever that bill is for the services that they've consumed within that month. So it's a different model from, and you talked about this earlier, and I see this a lot. I do a lot of recruitment, and the story I get most commonly in in interviews is, well, I had this customer situation, and I turned up to this customer, and they had a bad relationship with my company because things didn't go well, and we didn't pay the attention, so I went in and I turned the relationship around, and things are great now. And typically what's behind that is a deal was sold that has a number of, it's either perpetual or there's a renewal date 3 years later. So you have expert sales brinkmanship that closes that deal, and then the customer perhaps doesn't get the attention that they need until renewal date comes around. So that doesn't exist in AWS because our business model isn't that way. So of course we're still a commercial organization, and we have commercial targets that we need to that we're aiming to hit. But we measure performance based on the total, or we measure that commercial journey based on the total value, if you like, of a customer's usage of the platform over the course of the year. So the whole way our teams, our customer-facing teams, need to engage with organizations is very different. We are motivated to work backwards from the customers to help them leverage the AWS platform, and we think if we're doing that in the right way, then they'll leverage more of the platform, their consumption will increase, and that flywheel continues. So that's the difference, I think, from a traditional business.
So you probably don't have a traditional, say, a pipeline that's set up in any sort of a CRM system or anything of that
we do.
nature.
So,
okay.
yeah, so we do that. So we're still so we use CRM, for example, to track our customer engagements. We use tools like LinkedIn to connect with customers as well. So we still do all those things, but we're not motivated by end of the month, end of the quarter, end of the year deals. We think more long term about a partnership with the customer, and we think in the fullness of time, because of the nature of AWS and the building blocks of the services, there's very little use cases or very little sectors that can't leverage the platform. So we take a long term.
Can you share just a little bit about the technologies that maybe you use in the sales team? So obviously you have a CRM, you use LinkedIn for various purposes. Anything else that you're actually using that might be of interest or that's been helpful?
Not really. We're a little bit light, and I guess the reason being, I was chatting to yourself earlier on about this. one of the advantages of working in AWS is that we don't, again, I hear a lot of stories with if you're working on, a situation with a customer, you spend as much time internally trying to sell to your internal organization and forecast across different lines and all that type of stuff. We don't do a lot of that in AWS, and the reason is because we don't have to, because we don't have a legacy sales organization that we're trying to reorient towards a consumption-based model. So we don't have to do a lot of that stuff. Because the pressure we find that's on us is to spend more time with customers. We're hiring as fast as we can, but this is a new frontier for customers. So responsibility that we feel to deliver insight is very real. So we like to spend as much time as we can with customers. So as a result, probably the technology and the tooling that we use internally is less sophisticated, less complicated, maybe, than you might see in other organizations. Purely because at the moment we don't think we need to. We think it frees us up to spend more time with customers.
Well, it's fine, because I think that's part of the flip side of the equation is that you may have lots of tools, but if you're spending more time with the tools, less to the customer, you're not really getting anywhere. Question? Sorry.
I guess following on from that kind of discussion point then, so how do you as a new innovative organisation selling IT in a different way manage the customers that buy in a traditional way, the old school procurement people that still want to go and have that fight to the quarter end and they're expecting to knock on the door? How do you educate those guys, and change their philosophy? Because they've been built to defeat the salesperson, right? And it's a brave new world. How do you educate those people?
Very insightful. Yeah, I mean,
That's a good question.
The procurement battle, because we're victims of what we've created in many ways.
Yeah. So it's through education. That's the simple answer. But I think if with procurement organizations or procurement professionals, and I was chatting to one of them, a very senior CPO who works in a large enterprise. He's been in one for 10 years. He's moving on to another one in the next couple of months. With any change, some people get it, some people don't. But I think we're in this technology change or shift that we're seeing at the moment, I think, is undeniable and it's unavoidable, and you can see it everywhere. So I think those procurement professionals, they get it. At least a lot of them do. If not initially, through our education process, we can help them, and we can still help them be successful. They can still, be good at their jobs. There's different pricing models that are available to customers, from on demand, where you're not sure what your usage is going to be, so you just pay on demand. But then, if you know what your usage is going to be and you can reasonably predict it in the future, you can leverage, again, public programs that can knock 50% off your bill. But that takes a bit of work. So we can still work with those teams to understand how they can leverage the various public and private pricing contracts that we have, to maximise how cost is optimised for the enterprise organisation. So we can still absolutely help those guys be successful, and we don't see their function disappearing at all. In fact, they're one of our biggest advocates if they can help us educate their own organisations. They just have a different path, if you like, to be successful. So it's early engagement, it's partnership, and it's education.
It's actually, I think you nailed something that's really, really important, understanding where the incentives lie and being able to align how you sell to those to those initiatives and those motivations.
Yeah.
There's another question?
Yeah.
Oh, please.
Well, I actually work in sales, and then I think I have come to some conclusion, which is, yes, spend more time with clients, and then sales come. But then when you have the dashboard, how do you measure that? What's in this case, how do you ask people, okay, where were you today? Or who did you talk to today? Or how do you sell? How do you measure this? Spend more time with clients.
Tell a funny story. It's funny, because I've had managers like this. I'm sure you've run across this yourself, but they're literally just on your back all the time. Where were you? And in fact, an old friend of mine from like 15 plus years ago reached out to me because he was cleaning out his like some old files and stuff, and he saw a copy of an email he sent to our management, because they wanted us in the office at 8:30 to 5:30. Yeah. Now we're in sales. So I couldn't really rationalize that, right? So but how do you manage?
So it's so I've been there. I've been micromanaged before, and it's no fun. And I think it's not something I want to do. Even if I did, I think in place like AWS, I don't think, because we're moving to Boston, I think you do that. So my philosophy is, you hire really good, capable people, and then the job, part of the role is to support them and provide an environment where they can go and be successful. So I read on this topic obviously quite a bit. One of the chaps that inspires me quite a lot is a guy called Simon Sinek. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he did a TEDx talk, so not even the main TED conference, but he did a TEDx talk in 2009. And today it's the most viewed TEDx talk ever. The title was How Great Leaders Inspire Action. And he did an 18-minute talk where he used case studies of Apple, Martin Luther King, and one other. And he spoke about what these organizations or individuals have in common. And then he crafted this thing that he calls the golden circle, which is to start with why. So the reason these were great leaders that can inspire action is because they didn't talk about what they did or how they did it. They talked about why they did it. People follow why you do something, not what you do. And so I follow him a lot now, and I read about, and he's done a lot of work with the military, and his philosophy on leadership is that your role as a leader is to serve others. Your job is to serve those who are in your charge. And serving doesn't mean saying yes to everything. It's a bit like parenting. You've got to create an environment to be successful, but also make sure that they don't go and hurt themselves. But your job is to service those people. And when he talks to the military, there was literally people who put their lives on. They literally put their lives on the line for each other every day. It's literally what they do. So it's their epitome of his definition of leadership. And I think that's something that resonates with Amazon. We don't have a hierarchical culture, and we work back from the customers, and that resonates quite nicely with Amazon and with AWS. And personally, it resonates with me. So I'm not perfect. I don't always act like that, but I strive to. I find that inspiring, that method of leadership. Yeah. So, and I think people work best when they're happy and when they're inspired and when they have autonomy and when they have responsibility. And why would you remove any of those constraints just to ask somebody what they need? It's to me, it's counterproductive.
So what I read from your answer actually is 100%. So everyone comes, a sales rep comes and he says, what's your job? Well, you have to, you suggest to him that he should be as much as in contact with the client. So he could choose his activities in terms of what he wants to do. He wants to do an event, he wants to go and visit a client, or does the rep has an account?
I hope he's visiting his client, he or she, yeah. That's the goal, absolutely. Yeah. He doesn't have to ask me to go and do a customer meeting. No.
That is an interesting note, though, because some of the things that have changed in sales, and I haven't necessarily spent any time there, but like here's your talk, what's really changed from a selling perspective from when you started. But
yeah,
certainly one of the things I've started to see is just more of the how of selling. And it seems that people are not necessarily out of the building anywhere near as much as they used to be. When I was at Siebel, I traveled all the time for customers, right?
Right.
So that's what you did. Nowadays, with the advent of all the technologies, whether you use like Skype, phone calls, conference, whatever it is, it's just easier to not necessarily have to be in the room, present. Okay. One, what's kind of your philosophy on that? And two, are there things that you're noticing that have changed radically in sales?
Yeah, definitely. So I very much agree with that. And I think it's both an advantage and a disadvantage because we all carry these things now. So the advantage is we're mobile and work from anywhere. The disadvantage is you're mobile and you can work from anywhere. So when you're at home in the evening, it's very difficult not to take the iPhone and your family line or checking emails or whatever it is. So, but I think ultimately it's a great thing providing flexibility. So that's working practice. That's one thing that definitely seen a big change in. Other changes, particularly in the enterprise space, I think. I talked a little bit about decision making and selection being passed back to customers. I think that's a really good thing as well. We're seeing, and that's driven by this transformation that enterprises have to go through. So I think that's a big thing as well. Decades ago, you had an organization that had a major supplier, and when they were coming around to potentially renewing that, very difficult for them to change suppliers because of the cost and time involved because there was less choice. With that increased selection and choice available now, as well as the methods of working of enterprises changing, where decision making is devolving down to the teams who are actually delivering the products and the software culture that we have today. Those incremental buying decisions are happening now versus those 10-year outsourcing. I think that changed. I think we're only beginning to see the tip of the iceberg on that. That will continue to happen as well. Other things in working practices, bring your own device as well. So I think oftentimes people join organisations and the collaboration tools that they have at their fingertips are way behind what we're used to socially in the consumer environment. So I think that will continue to change as well.
Amazing. Are you a big user of Slack?
No.
I'm not either. I'm always curious because that seems to be like the new hotness right now.
Right.
Sales technologies is
Okay,
Slack bots and
Right.
I can share more later.
Yeah.
I wouldn't rate it.
I would rate it highly, so, but
Really?
I'm a technologist, so I'm bound to honour.
It's good for getting information across the teams, though.
We do use it with customers in some of our community building activities at AWS actually, but we don't use it internally that much, but we use it quite extensively on the reach out, so it's public service, right?
Much better for that than internally. Yeah.
It's great.
Good for getting announcements out. Good for getting them into like community and stuff like that. Awful for getting like commitments from other teams and stuff like that. You can't get an action point out of it.
Any other interesting tools that people are using? Just out of curiosity, anything that's been like really interesting that you've come across?
I came across the website Angel List 2 or 3 weeks ago. I think on LinkedIn, we are probably all on LinkedIn. Some contents recently have been non-professionally related, I found. And Angel List turned up.
Angel List for startups, yeah.
Is anyone having any opinion on this new professional network in any way? Or is that the next LinkedIn? Is that something?
No, I mean, not so much.
No.
It's for investors really and startup communities, but it is an interesting data source. So I've actually used it, or I've advised other startups that I work with to actually use certain tools that I will not name, but to collect information from various different data sources like the ones we've mentioned as a means of prospecting. And so in that case, it's actually one of the big things that really has changed is that we have a lot more information about our customers. Like, just imagine, 10 years ago, did you know of a customer, if you reached out to them, that they were a big fan of, say, Manchester football? Well, now you can see their Twitter feeds and you can see all the tweets about them following the team, right? And that could be a talking point. Those things you used to find out eventually.
Yeah. Well, the whole analytics space, I think, is a great example of how things have changed. So a decade ago, it was to preserve big organizations with deep pockets because it was so expensive to store all that data and then analyze all that data. Whereas now, look at the startups that are coming on here, the Spotify, Just Eat, etc. And they can store that data inexpensively, and they can spin up capacity that they need to analyze it when they need to, and then spin it down again so no longer pay for it. These organizations are generating so much more insight. They're so data driven, and that's what's powering the services they improve and then they deliver to their customers. It's a great example of a massive shift in analytics and insight through data. It's no longer just the preserve of big companies with big pockets.
Yeah, I think also on the other level, I was going to say, even people resources. Right? So you have things like Amazon Turk, Mechanical Turk.
Yeah.
You have Upwork, you have all these sites where you can now fractionalize work. And so someone like myself, I can have a list of 10,000 contacts and I can get a full spreadsheet of all their LinkedIn profiles and all that. So
it's a marketplace.
Amazing. Marketplace.
I don't know the name of the tool, but I heard of it was at an Apigee event where
Apigee, the API.
the API management company, and the presenter showed his profile from some tool, he wasn't mentioning which one, where they basically told like this is an outward going person, like this is how you should be talking to him.
I know the tool.
Okay, so
It's actually, I can name it. It's called Crystal Knows.
Crystal Knows. Okay.
Not like knows like this, but knowing. No. So, very interesting tool. There's actually going to be a lot of these AI tools that are going to be popping up or already have popped up There's tools like Charlie app, which does some really interesting things around scheduling. Crystal Knows, which reads personality profiles based upon big data and social information provided by people freely. And there's also tools that I've seen that will actually write out your prospecting emails for you. So it's definitely we're in a very interesting space just from a sales technology perspective.
Yeah.
Which maybe that could be like a whole nother session at a future event. Would you like to check one of those out?
Yeah.
Sales tech
Absolutely.
session. Right. Does anyone have any other questions that you?
I think in tooling there is a UDeal.
Huh?
There is a tool called UDeal.
UDeal.
Judo.
Due diligence. Yeah.
Okay.
Which is quite good. I think you can search for the company and it tells you the information balance sheet. For example, who are the directors, the address. Well, at least if you haven't heard about anyone and someone comes to you and gives you the company name, you can actually search it there quickly and find out their standing, I guess.
Excellent. Well, there's a gentleman in the back who had a question.
Yeah, so talking about all these different tools about contacting prospects, just wanted to get people's opinion in this room who are sales guys. So I come from a very traditional background of recruiting, sponsorship, sales, and I find that the more these so-called analytic tools come out, I think it's making salespeople lazy. So when we're talking about tools, I still think the best tool is the phone, and actually really connecting with individuals and really building that personal rapport. Do you not see that the shift in technology potentially could make sales guys less active and more reliant on technology rather than the good old-fashioned hard work?
I think totally opposite of that. Like I use Looker. I don't know if anyone else uses Looker here for like data analytics reports. It kind of gives us reports of who's doing what activity on our website and what kind of giving them trends and stuff like that. And with that data and with everything behind me, I know I can make incisive calls to those people at the right times and stuff like that and not bother them maybe when they're not needing or not looking at anything like that. I think having that knowledge gives you a lot more power in that conversation rather than going in kind of just like
Cold.
kind of, yeah.
Cold calling in Amazon.
We didn't really touch on prospecting activity at all.
What are the tools? How do you approach?
Yeah, we I'm trying to think of so absolutely, so it's a mix between a push and a pull. So we do these large events, which ways that I spoke about earlier, like the summit we had last week, which increase the profile of AWS, and we get a certain amount of interest, if you like, after those types of events. But we absolutely prospect, and we practically go out to the market, and we're a little bit fortunate in the way in that Amazon is a very well-known, very trusted brand, and because of AWS's position in the marketplace, if you've got a CIO who thinks that part of the transformation needs to do requires a robust cloud strategy, which most of them do, then they'll be open to a conversation with AWS about what that looks like. So yes, we do outbound prospecting, but we don't have a huge challenge getting meetings, if you like. Now, I'm not saying it's a walk in the park, and we can be lazy about it, but a combination of the brand value of Amazon and the position of AWS in the marketplace, makes a conversation, if you're clever and diligent about how you approach it and set it up, it makes it a valuable kind of activity, if you like, that CXOs want to pursue. So it's probably different for some of you maybe who are working in more niche companies with small organizations with more niche offerings, where you have to spend a lot of time just introducing who the company are and repeating that. So that's one of the advantages of working for a large brand.
What's your advice for startups that are trying to sell their SaaS services? So I've worked for British tech companies and now LinkedIn, and there's definitely a misconception of a lot of techies that think they don't need to sell. And there's all sorts of terms now, growth this, growth hacking that, and I'm not a sales person, and we're not making money. It's going to be freemium, and it's going to be the next Facebook. So the fundamentals are still the same commercially. So what is your advice for kind of startups? And obviously you get to see a lot of them because they build on your platform. So what's your advice to startups that are trying to sell their service?
Yeah, I deal with startups on a daily basis, right? So, look, there's some organizations where the founder philosophy is not sales friendly, and that's just flat out. And I think those organizations for sales reps are not going to be very productive. You're swimming upstream, and eventually founder they'll come to the realization that if they want to grow, if they want to thrive as an organization, they're going to have to build out a real sales infrastructure and embrace sales. And you've seen that with companies like Slack, who've developed a sales organization. A company like Palantir, big enterprise technology company. They felt they didn't need salespeople. They have salespeople, right? So the reality is that very few organizations can scale to a very large company on the back of a technology alone. It takes a certain amount of engaging with organizations to understand what is the value that they would derive out of this solution, what challenges are they trying to solve. And that's not something you're necessarily going to be able to figure out from a website. So that's why when I see articles such as the death of B2B salespeople, or there's going to be 1 million less sales jobs, yeah, there's going to be less of the transactional roles where you're just taking orders, because you don't need a human being to take an order. A website can do that very effectively. But when you have to sell something which has some level of complexity in an organization that is complex, could you sell something to an organization like Verizon, one of my customers, the biggest telecom in the U.S. If you're trying to sell something here to 3 or O2 or whomever, like you'd fail miserably, because those organizations are trying to solve a problem. They're not trying to fit in a tool. And that's where the value of having a salesperson who can bring insights, who has knowledge, experience, can speak to the needs of the customer. Those organizations will be successful if they embrace that. So what I suggest is just for those companies that don't seem to have what I call a sales culture, you're not going to change that. That's going to be something that organizationally you're going to have to come to realization with. And whether their investors force it, whether the founder comes to realize it, they'll change. I suggest when folks ask me, what type of company should they join companies that have a true sales culture where the founder embraces and understands the value of sales and is actually involved in sales. Even if they are a technologist or product-oriented person, look for founders that realize that sales is what's going to make them successful, not necessarily product. If you talk about it at a product level, to be honest, a lot of products kind of look the same. A lot of products can do the same things. There may be incremental differences here or there, this feature or that feature, this benefit, that benefit. The true value comes in what you can provide overall from your insights, your knowledge, and de-risking these decisions for customers. That's what it comes down to. And a lot of things that you said before, even at the enterprise level, are the same thing at the startup level.
I think that's probably in a startup, the founder has to take on the sales role. Because we were in a position a year ago where we're 10 years old, we're a consultancy, we've grown organically to 25 people. And we never had to do sales because business just came in.
Yeah, I did know.
Yeah, and that's changed. So and we had to take a decision, do we hire someone to do sales, or do I go myself and do sales? And taking someone on as a salesperson was too risky, because we would only know after 6 months if that person was actually good in the role that we were going to give them. So in the end, I decided to take it, but it was a long run. And I believe, like looking back, I wouldn't do it anyhow else. I don't think that you can successfully like get someone to take on sales, except if you have like enough runway and you have enough cash to to take a few risks.
Sure.
But I don't think else you just have to bite the bullet yourself as a CEO.
Yeah, CEO. I mean, if you're a CEO, you are also responsible for sales.
You're doing sales.
And I remind a lot of founders I work with, you want to be CEO,
You have to do sales.
the revenue's on you, so figure it out. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We're kind of up to the hour now. And so before we break, I want to ask one last question. I ask everyone that speaks. Is there a, because we talked a lot about learning, and I'm a big believer in just continuous learning. There's actually a really good book I'm reading right now. I'm trying to get through it, called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Really fascinating. And loving everything I'm reading. It really definitely resonates. But is there something that you've read recently that's been kind of inspiring or really got you to think deeply?
Yeah, so I'm a consumer of articles more than books, and hence this Simon Sinek. But I'm at the Phoenix Project. Have any of you read the Phoenix Project? I think if you're doing enterprise sales, it's a great education of it's basically a fictional story of. Have you read it?
No.
It's a fictional story of a large enterprise that's doing everything wrong, and IT is being paid for it. That's the journey they go through. So
Sure.
if you've been doing enterprise sales, the Phoenix Project is definitely worth reading. You'll have a chuckle as you go through that. But it's a good way as well. I mean, one way to deliver insight is to have 30 years of experience. But if you don't have 30 years of experience, you have to cram it in some way. And reading books and getting insight from these organizations so that you can relate to the situation your customers are going through is a great thing. Another book that I haven't read yet, but I'm going to read is The Innovator's Dilemma, which I'm looking forward to reading. It's been recommended to me. So, yeah, again, it's the journey of innovation.
Yeah, and definitely check out that Simon Sinek TED Talk. I think it's awesome. I've heard him speak in person at a HubSpot's conference, which was amazing.
Yeah.
Love to be able to get him, one of these days here, possibly. But always got to think big. But I really appreciate you coming down here and sharing. Just round of applause because I thought this was